just for a couple of moments. Just a couple of moments so we can get the program started. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Garden City,
Use the mic.
okay. I'm afraid I'll start singing. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Garden City Historical Society, we welcome you this evening to our museum. This evening's event is a joint fundraiser. We are working tonight with another very important and what am I trying to say? Another very important organization here in town, the Garden City Bird Sanctuary. Rob Alvey founded the Garden City Bird Sanctuary over on Tanner's Pond Road back in 1995, and he's been the driving force in the effort to make something happen with the 9-acre stormwater basin. This coming August, that stormwater basin is going to be transformed into the Tanner's Pond Environmental Center. In fact, recently, Adelphi University awarded a grant to the Garden City Bird Sanctuary, which will enable it to operate 7 days a week during the summer. The Garden City Bird Sanctuary is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, just like the Garden City Historical Society. And Rob and his staff invite you to visit the Garden City Bird Sanctuary if you have time. It's a beautiful, lovely place. Let's see, do I have the hours? Who knows the hours?
12 to 5.
12 to 5? Okay. 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 Well, I want to take a moment to thank a few of my fellow board members who were integral in putting together this evening's function. Mary Mahoney is the Special Events Chairperson. Albert Intreglier is another board member. Beth Watrous, another board member. Gloria Jones, and our very own Chris Harder, who did a lot of the floral arrangements that you see here this evening. So we thank them very much for all their work. I also want to point out to everyone some interesting and good news for the Historical Society. Starting in about 2 weeks, on June 1st, Albert Intreglier will be the new president, and Mary Mahoney will be the new vice president of the Garden City Historical Society. So we wish them all the well and best in their efforts as they carry us forward with all the work that we've been doing. Before I made this little presentation tonight, I wanted to do a little research on Mark Twain, and I came across a very interesting, appropriate anecdote. Apparently, back in Mark Twain's time, he was getting a lot of correspondence and photographs from people, men, who claimed that they looked just like him. So I thought this story was appropriate to tell because of Rob's striking resemblance to Mark Twain. But what happened is Mark Twain didn't particularly like this because it entailed a lot of, return correspondence. So what he did is he had a form letter drafted, and it's very brief. Here's what the form letter said. It said, "My dear sirs, I thank you very much for your letters and your photo. In my opinion, you are more like me than any other of my numerous doubles. You even resemble me more than myself. In fact, I intend to use your pictures to shave by. Yours, thankfully, Samuel Clemens." Ladies and gentlemen, this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for you to meet Mark Twain himself.
Good evening. I'm actually not not surprised to see so many people out here this evening. There's been a lot of interest in America in seeing pictures of a dead guy recently. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to present to you a man whose veneration for truth is only exceeded by his high moral fiber and majestic presence. I refer in those vague and uncertain terms to myself. If it is the custom of having introductions, I prefer to do them myself, so I can rely on someone to get in all the facts. I was born modest, but it wore off. I was once introduced to an audience by a lawyer who stood with his hands in his pockets. He introduced me as Mark Twain, a humorist who is really funny. A rare creature indeed. Well, I was struck blind by this complimentary thunderbolt, and I sat there for an hour as he proceeded to address the audience with accolades of my accomplishments and wonderful stories of all the things I had done. And I never realized how I had never heard something so more beautifully phrased or so well deserved. But I observed we had a much rarer creature in the audience than a humorist who was really funny. We had a lawyer who kept his hands in his own pockets. Lawyers, congressmen have a well-earned reputation for being able to talk excessively on all sorts of flowery languages and certainties and a spew of outlandish facts that have no factual basis, and opinions they assure us are everyone's, whether we agree with them or not, so as not to accomplish anything at all. If God had waited for a congressman to finish speaking before he proclaimed, "Let there be light," we'd all be still in darkness. Oh, but I do like compliments. We all do. Humorists, burglars, congressmen, all of us in the trade. The plan of the newspapers is good. If you can't get a compliment any other way, pay yourself one. I can do that often. In fact, I can do it right now. I can state that there are two most remarkable men in all the world. Kipling is one and I am the other. Between us, we cover all the bases. Kipling knows everything there is to know about anything, and I know the rest. Well, it's a pleasure to appear before you in Garden City. Under my circumstances, it's a pleasure to appear anywhere. I apologize that the marching band and the elephants I had arranged to entice you to come and join me here tonight are no longer available. They detoured to Albany to try to entice the State Assembly and Senate to show up and actually work. There's still one elephant hiding in the parking lot. I want to thank you for attending the services this evening. I nearly missed it myself. The travel plans for my current home station can be very complicated. I came by railroad. It was a slow train. It would chug along for about 7 minutes and have to stop for about half an hour and rest. It was an interesting trip. At one stop, an unticketed passenger was found hiding, and when he appeared out of nowhere, some officials dispatched that passenger and transferred onto the express train to hell. I think I know who, you may know who I am referring to. I have never personally killed anyone in my life, but there are some obituaries I have read with great pleasure. There was a young couple that left the home station with me on the train. They were newlyweds. By the time we landed in Garden City, They had 3 kids. And a grandchild on the way. I finally advised the conductor to take the couch catcher off the front of the train and to put it on the rear of the train, because at the rate we were going, we certainly weren't going to hit any cows, but there was nothing to prevent them climbing on board behind us. If I have to travel by railroad again, I shall go the other way. There was a dog on the train, and it barked at nothing all day long, until it died. I'd never seen a type of dog like this before. It was a long, low dog with very short legs, sort of like parentheses backwards. It was made on the plan of a bench, actually, and it seemed satisfied, but I thought the plan was structurally weak. It could have used another pair of legs in the middle. I didn't ask what type of dog it was, although the owner seemed to be proud of it. Said it had won prizes in some shows. Said people often stopped and stared at it. Well, this did not seem strange to me. I said I could have told him, if you take a long, low dog like that and waddle along the street anywhere in the world and not charge anything, people will stop and stare. Well, if I was built like that, I could take prizes myself. Well, my wife Olivia and I arrived in Garden City. Before leaving the station, she asked me how much money I had. I checked my purse and counted out exactly $47.02. She told me she would take the $47, thank you very much, Samuel, and she would go shopping instead. She wanted to buy some things and stuff. She told me, you go ahead to the Garden City Historical Society and keep your 2 cents for yourself. Particularly if anybody asks you for some advice. Now, before I left the station, I noticed an elderly man waiting to board the train for the return trip upstairs. He was recently departed. He was carrying a small bouquet of flowers to give someone he hadn't seen in a long time. He said, "Hello, Mr. Twain. Sorry I'll miss your lecture." His name was Dale. He appeared eager for the trip. In fact, he was a tad disappointed that it had taken so many years to get started. And I told him, well, you're on the right train, old friend. You served your country, you served your community, and you served your family. You would have been able to get to heaven earlier if you hadn't made one cardinal sin. You let your grandkids cut your hair.
Oh.
I think it's the 11th commandment, and the heavenly barbers set up a protest. Anyway, it's behind us now, so get on board, and we parted. Now, I've had an opportunity to walk around your fair and lovely village, although I wonder why Mr. Alexander Turney Stewart felt it necessary to name it the village of Garden City. Sounds like somebody couldn't quite make up their mind what they wanted Garden to be, a city or a village or a town or whatever. I had a chance to tour what you folks prefer to call as the A.T. Stewart Historical House. Now, isn't this a wonderful edifice? Just as lovely, but it was also perplexing to me before. I climbed up the grand stairway in the front and entered this fine apostle home, and I walked in a complete circle around the first floor to see the foyer, the office room, the immense and wonderful decorated living room, onto the grand dining room, and back again down the hall to the foyer. And it struck me, this house must have been designed by an architect that knows my wife. The house has no kitchen. And when it comes to cooking,
My kind of architect.
my wife likes to go shopping. I passed by the historic Garden City Hotel, which I admit is a lovely structure. But it looks amazingly too modern for being a building advertised as the exact place where Mr. Lindbergh is supposed to have slept before he single-handedly flew across the Atlantic in a plane. I had originally intended to spend some time at the Garden City pool, but discovered that it was not a hall for pool, but merely holes in the ground filled with water for little kids to spend time swimming, splashing, drinking, wetting, and making a ton of noise. The noises from those youngsters were overwhelming, excessively loud, and as terrorizing as the screams of the cannibals I heard went back to my days as a reporter on the Sandwich Islands. I could not, in all honesty, understand why some adult did not take advantage of the opportunity to drown the little kids in the pool, to give the rest of us old-timers some peace and quiet. Now, as a writer and book publisher, I certainly did not pass up the opportunity to visit the Garden City Public Library, spend a little time there to note that many of my own works are on the shelves, or how often they're taken out for reading. A few of my books are comfortably gathering dust. They're considered classics, you know. The word classic means many people have a copy of the book, or know someone who has a copy of the book, but they all admit they never read it, or know anyone who actually has. The definition of classic must mean I'll get around to it someday. It's a book which people praise and figure someone else must have read it so they don't have to. I did happen to find a copy of Tom Sawyer, as well as a copy of the Huckleberry Finn, on a shelf. But they were dusty, but I was pleased. Huck Finn has been a friend of mine for over 100 years. He helped me make a tight amount of money. Some libraries have banned it. They burned it publicly. They can moral crusaders in some towns publicly proclaim the book to be scandalous, controversial, racist, irreverent, lewd, and not fit for children. Whenever I hear that, I print up 25,000 new copies. And usually sell them out in a week. I did find copies of a newer book, Plum Island, written by one of the popular Garden City residents authors, Nelson DeMille, at the library. While this book may not be considered a classic years from now, it sure seems to be read by a lot of folk. It was ratting toward. I couldn't believe how much popular that book was. Now, I did find several copies of a popular children's book at the library, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. While this book may not be considered a classic for 100 years from now, it sure seems to be read by a lot of children. I decided it's time for me to write a brand new book after my autobiography is published, and I've learned that an author can make a lot more money when he writes a series of books with the same characters, right? So I'm deciding on what to name my new book. The working title is The Further Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Harry Potter on Star Trek with James Bond. I walked around the town, city, village, or whatever it is, and saw the famous Garden City Cathedral. a fine stone monument made in memory to your founder, a magnificent Episcopal edifice with a tower and spire up on top, elegant stained glass, marble, all the trimmings. But I noticed it actually only completed its construction by cutting short the original grander plans when the Stewart widow ran out of money. And that's a fact. Sort of like when my wife returns home from shopping. I also noticed the cathedral was fairly empty of people. I thought maybe this was because the village moral crusaders decided to build another church, the Garden City Community Church, for instead. Ain't that's why it's called the Garden City Community Church? Anybody supposed to go there and be a member? I guess the village planners' idea of Christian unity was fleeting, since there are innumerable religious establishments in this village of every size, shape, and denomination. Yet I did see most of them empty. What a delightful irony. Man is the only animal that has the true religion. Several of them. The current variety of religions seem to have a separate heavens and separate prayers and separate rules on getting to heaven by actually denying the actual heavenly pleasures of this world. People should recognize that of all the delights of this world, man cares most for sexual intercourse. Oh, the human being, like all the mortals, naturally places sexual intercourse far and above all other joys. The very thought of it excites him. Opportunity sets him wild. In this state he will risk life, reputation, everything, even his chance to reach heaven, to make good on that opportunity and ride it to the overwhelming climax. From youth to middle age, men of all men and women prize copulation above all other pleasures combined. He will go to any length, risk it, risk fortune, character, life itself. And what do you think he has done? He has left it out of heaven. Prayer takes its place. Eternal prayer. What a dreary way to spend eternity. Not much of an incentive to be good. Aren't we taught God is love? Well, if the deity had only replaced a portion of the eternal prayer time with intercourse time, imagine how many people would be happy to die and get up to heaven. Man was made at the end of the week's work, when God was tired. Such is the human race. It's often a pity that Noah didn't miss the boat. I'll give you another story. There was a man that died, and St. Peter welcomed to Heaven's Hotel and asked him what denomination he was. The man replied, Baptist. And St. Peter escorted him to room 12, but asked him to keep quiet when they passed room 6. Another man died, and St. Peter, finding that the man was a Methodist, escorted him to room 14, but told him to hush when they passed room 6. A Lutheran couple died, and St. Peter led them to room 7, but told them not to make any noise when they go by room 6. A Mormon and his 3 wives were killed in an accident, and St. Peter walked them all to room 23, but advised them to keep silent when they passed room 6. And one of the wives finally asked St. Peter, who's in room 6? And St. Peter said, it's for the Catholics. They think they're the only ones here. To put human life simply, birth is simply the beginning. Life is merely the journey, and death is merely the final destination we all share. We all share that equally. But there is not one person amongst us who at one time or other has wanted to take some other person and make them have a shortcut on their journey through life and escort them to their final destination as soon as possible. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you do not mind if I smoke. Where the hell are my cigars? Thank you, St. Peter. I believe there is some sort of a commandment against smoking when you are in an insurrection of this nature, but I'm trying to work to get it removed. Mind you, I have no objection to abstinence as long as it doesn't harm anybody. Smooth. I practice abstinence myself on occasion. I make it a rule never to smoke when I'm asleep. It's not that so much that I care for moderation myself, but I just do it as an example for others. I have to prove that I'm not a slave to the habit. I can give it up anytime I want to. In fact, I've done it 1,000 times. First time I gave it up, I was about 9 or 10. They told me I would shorten my life by 10 years if I continued to smoke. So I got scared and quit it for 2 or 3 hours. Then I finally decided that that last decade wouldn't be worth living if I couldn't be smoking in it. So I went back to lighting a cigar and stuck with it ever since. Well, another time I gave it up on advice of a doctor. I had been confined to bed for several days with a lumbago, and the doctor finally said, "Twain, my remedies haven't got a chance against all that fighting against your lumbago in your body. You smoke extravagantly, you eat all manner of things that don't agree with each other's company, and you drink at least 2 large tumblers of bourbon every day. Don't you?" And I said, "Well, yes, but I only drink them as a preventative for toothache. I've never had the toothache. I don't intend to ever have the toothache." He said, "That's all right, but we can't make progress that way. You have to moderate those things." I said, "I can't do that, doctor." He said, "Why can't you?" Well, because I lack the willpower. I can cut them off entirely, but I can't moderate them. Well, he said, "Well, that'll have to do." So I cut off all these things for 2 days and 2 nights. At the end of that time, the lumbago got discouraged and left my body, and I was a well man again. So I gave thanks and took up with these wonderful delicacies once more. Then a friend of mine, I had an occasion to recommend this remedy to an elderly lady, a friend of mine. She had gone down to the point where medicines had no beneficial help for her. So I told her I could cure her in a week. I said she must give up smoking and drinking and eating and swearing, and by the end of the week she'd be on her feet. She sadly replied she couldn't give up smoking and drinking and swearing because she'd never done those things. So there it was. She neglected her habits. She was like a sinking ship with no cargo to throw overboard. Well, if she just had one bad habit, I could have saved her. What a shame. Well, I'd like to take an opportunity here to explain something you might be interested in hearing, and it may help you understand where I've been for the last several decades. Heaven is not quite the paradise we've been taught to expect. Most of it is no smoking. There are plenty of dogs in heaven, but a few cats. but only enough for the entertainment of the dogs. Because after all, a dog is truly a man's best friend, and his loyalty to man is unsurpassed, loving and simple. Why, you can do a simple experiment to prove a dog is man's best friend. You take your dog, you take your child, and you take your mother-in-law, and you lock them in a trunk and wait for about a half an hour. When you pop open the trunk, which one of the three is happy to see you? God bless dogs. Half it is big. There are areas where there's herds of millions of buffalo that Native Americans use their ponies to play tag with. Yes, there are recreational activities and some sports, but a few sports have proven difficult to sponsor in the afterlife, and baseball is one example. A lot of folk have interested in playing since they never had to worry about a rainout, but the rules had to be modified, and people lost interest in playing under the restrictions imposed by the supreme umpire. You see, hitting is frowned upon, and stealing isn't permitted at all. Well, the baseball games got boring and people just gave up. There is one fellow up there, Joe DiMaggio. He's got a 258,000 day streak of bunting. I mentioned that most of heaven is the most smoking area. Well, I can still occasionally enjoy a cigar once in a while in the billiards room. We don't even need matches. We just stand there and wait for a former congressman or lawyers who's smoking to wander by. You see, what we perceive as heaven, lawyers and congressmen perceive as eternal damnation. Try as they might, they have no way of getting our attention. They have no impact on people who have no needs or pay any taxes at all. For congressmen, this is purely hell. And they wander through our heaven until their bodies literally start burning and smoking. So once in a while, we just light our cigars off their heads and duck back into the billiards room. Now, America has changed considerably since I was here last. One of the most remarkable changes you had is that you elected the first black president, Barack Obama, and other African Americans, descendants of former slaves, as senators, congressmen, and even on the Supreme Court. Even the sports world has a black man of interest who has won many golf competitions, Tiger Woods. But I understand his recent marital problems have been resolved after some tense negotiations, and he's resumed golf. Mr. Woods can carry his own clubs in his bag, but Mrs. Woods will carry his balls in her purse. I was born in Missouri, and after my father died when I was 12, I wound up getting experience on a lot of trades: printing, writing, merchandising, and eventually became a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi. When the Civil War broke out, I joined up with the South. I was born in Missouri. And being a patriotic youth, I did not stay a soldier for too long, though. I liked the way I looked in a fancy uniform. Marching and practicing was okay, but I quickly learned an important point. Never march to a battlefield where the vultures look overfed. We had no officer for our troop and were advised to make our own battle rules. I voted that our troop learn to master the art of retreat and urged the soldiers to practice retreating diligently. I was outvoted by those patriotic fools. As the march to our first battle commenced, I had the misfortune to get sidetracked by a wonderful, beautiful flower I'd noticed growing on the side of the road in the edge of the woods. And then I tore my sleeve on a thorn, and I returned to camp to change my shirt. I missed the entire firefight. I later saw buzzards circling the fields. So I went west on the overland stage to seek my fortune in the civil land of the Nevada Territory instead. I eventually settled in Virginia City, which was a good place for a man to lose his religion. But it had already left by the time I got there. It was wide open gambling places, murders, street fights, riots, a whiskey mill on every 16 steps, a half-dozen jails, and some talk about building a church. It's no place for a Presbyterian, and I did not remain one for long. Before getting married and civilized, I continued west to San Francisco, where I became unemployed. And I spent a considerable amount of time looking for a job. This was tough because I didn't want to work. Well, Lady Lux happened to smile on me, and I was given a post in the Sacramento Union as their special correspondent to the Sandwich Islands. Well, our first stop was Honolulu, and I was naturally anxious to explore this dreamy and enchanted place. Now, the problem was I had been in Carson City and had a wild horse once before, so in Honolulu, I ruled out a fast horse and wanted a safe one. I asked for an excessively gentle horse, one with no spirit whatsoever, a lame one at that. Well, they showed me an animal that looked like it wanted to lean up against something. So I chose him, and he went along peaceably enough, but so absorbed in meditation, it began to worry me. I thought to myself, this horse is planning some sort of outrage against me. No horse ever thought so over a subject so profoundly just for nothing. The more the thing preyed on my mind, the more frightened I got, and the more I rode him, the more worried I became for my life. Finally, I dismounted to see if what was anything wild in his eyes, and I can tell you what a relief it was to find out he'd only fallen asleep.